In today's video, we have all the latest news around the NHL. Today, we're looking at some comments around Sam Reinhart. Was he ever close to leaving the Florida Panthers in free agency? We'll discuss what he had to say about that, plus the latest on Seth, Jarvis, and getting a new contract done with the Carolina Hurricanes. We're hearing some real momentum towards getting something done. We'll discuss where the numbers might fall and how it could impact the team and what other subsequent moves might come from that. Plus, we have some trade talk around the Nashville Predators, the Buffalo Sabres, and the latest on Trevor Zegras. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of things to take a look at here today. There's been no new signings reported today, so nothing like that to discuss, but we do have some interesting comments when it comes to one player who did get a big contract in free agency, and that's Sam Reinhart, Stanley Cup champion, member of the Florida Panthers. I know there was a lot of talk in heading into free agency, especially where he, theoretically had the opportunity to speak to other teams. We knew the Panthers didn't have a great cap situation. They lost, unfortunately, several players that they were not able to retain, including some key defensemen like Brandon Montour and Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Obviously, some members of the forward group as well had to move on. And, Reinhart was one of the key guys that you knew that they were prioritizing to keep above all anybody else. But there was some talk that on the open market, he was going to be able to get upwards of $11.5, maybe $11.75 million. That if a team had a chance to bring Reinhart in after the season he had this past year, not to mention the solid young career he's built before that they were going to be willing to pay him some big bucks to come to their organization. Well, we knew the Panthers probably had a chance because of the no state tax and the fact that he obviously loved playing there, just won a Stanley Cup, that he was probably willing to give them a bit of a discount, and he certainly did that. He signed for far less with the Panthers than what we expected he would get on the open market. He probably left, anywhere $10 to $15 million on the table. There was no doubt. But like I said, you factor in a little bit of a difference in taxes, which isn't, that much money compared to what he left on the table, but it does, impact things for sure. And then the fact that some people, the way they look at things, you can't put a price tag on your happiness per se, and the fit with the team, the lifestyle, and everything comes with it. And Reinhart was asked about this, and he said that leaving was never really an option for him, signing somewhere else, that he and his wife absolutely wanted to make it work in Florida. It's the best place to play hockey is what he had to say, and they were thrilled with the commitment they got back and were able to sign and stay. So it was really never really close at all to him leaving. I know there were some rumors around free agency where the Panthers took so long to get the deal done that maybe it meant that he was on the verge of maybe leaving. But it doesn't sound like that was ever close. We've never heard any rumors either that another team really had a chance to make a big offer either. So that tells me that this rumor here is likely true. Obviously what he's saying is absolutely truthful, that there was never really an opportunity that he was never going to entertain going anywhere else. So Sam Reinhart, if there was any speculation that you heard about him, entertaining offers or maybe leaving, I think we can safe to say that that's squashed and probably never happened. Seth Jarvis, we know he's one of the remaining unsigned restricted free agents. One of the more interesting names to watch here is, in my opinion, still an up-and-coming player. I don't think he's anywhere near his ceiling, but he's, throughout the course of his entry-level contract in the past 2-3 seasons here with Carolina, his value, not only to the team, but what he's bringing on and off the ice and his importance to them has slowly been growing. He's got an infectious personality, well beloved by his teammates as well, and the production just keeps coming. So clearly he's worked his way into being a top-line player, and why many of us said that if the Hurricanes had to prioritize Jarvis and Marty Necas, Jarvis is going to get the long-term big money deal, whereas Necas is likely going to be traded or maybe at best signed short-term, which is what ended up happening. Necas is likely not getting dealt, not at this point at least. He's probably going to play at least one more year in Carolina. As long as Carolina continues to play well, we'll see how the season goes, but I think it's kind of going to be a feeling out period for Necas to have a little bit of a bigger role this year with the organization. And if things go well, maybe they extend. If they don't, maybe he wants to move on like he had originally requested before we get into the offseason here at the end of the regular season and playoffs. So Jarvis, on the other hand, we know is a huge role, has no intentions to want to go anywhere. And according to the Canes Corner podcaster Adam Gold, he says according to his sources, that there's a real momentum towards getting a contract done, and it could be getting close to being done here soon. He feels that the average annual value could top $8 million, says maybe even 8.5. That's a lot of dough. I mean, but Jarvis is still young enough that you know that he's not hit his ceiling. He's going to continue to get better. And I guess they have to determine how high they feel that ceiling is and how much of an increase they're likely going to see in production over the next 2, 3, 4 years, like the meaty part of this contract. So we'll see how the final number works out to. Now, like I said before, I've mentioned numerous times, I rely on AFB analytics. So to me, they project out all the NHL contracts every year for players that need new contracts. They have him projected out on a long-term deal at $7.75 million. So anything at 8 or over is definitely what they would consider analytically an overpayment. But like I said, it's hard. I'm sure, I don't know exactly how their model works to factor in future growth. So based on that's you have to project that he's going to continue to get better and better and better. And I wouldn't be shocked if he turns out to be a 40 goal scorer here in his mid or later 20s. It sounds like both sides are motivated to get an 8-year deal done, to get him there long term as much as possible. Now, Puckpedia, our new main resource for cap services here, shows them being $6.4 million in space. However, they could create more space because on that roster, to get to that number, they do have a few extra players. They have an extra forward, an extra defenseman. So there's some waivers exempt players like Morrow and Nadeau, for example. They may or may not be on the roster to start the season. They can certainly go to the minors, at least on paper, if need be, to create some extra space. And those two contracts alone could take you from 6.4 pretty well right around that $8 million mark. So they could squeeze Jarvis in at $8 million without really doing anything per se. Now, and I honestly think if they're going to go anything above 8, though, it's going to get a little bit trickier. And they're going to have a harder time creating that space. That's when I feel a player like Jesperi Kotkaniemi likely comes into play. I know they're not fond of that contract. Moving it's not going to be easy. And they're probably not going to move that contract without taking something back. The goal would be to maybe add something to it. To take that, whatever you take back is going to be less money, less term to kind of get out of it sooner. Not real obvious of where that could be. His name has been out there throughout the course of the offseason, but we haven't really heard any serious traction on him getting moved. If they were to land a player like a Laine or some of these other names that they've been linked to, it pretty much would be a given that the other team, like the Jackets or whomever, would have to take him back in a deal to land another big money contract. We know the Hurricanes, on top of wanting to get Jarvis done, they very well could benefit from another top 6 forward too. And I wouldn't be surprised that that's their move. After losing Jake Gensel, they're going to want to try to replace that if they can. But getting Jarvis done is a huge first step. They can't add Jarvis at a big money contract and go get another top 6 forward without shedding considerable money. So we'll see where things go. But right now, obviously, both sides are motivated to get an 8-year deal done. Sources out there, according to this podcast, think it's going to be over 8, maybe closer to 8.5. We know that Aho is the highest paid player, just shy of $10 million, $975. He's not going to get anywhere near that. Probably at least $1 million, if not $1.5 million less than that. Maybe 825 is kind of like your middle ground where they end up meeting on the middle here. But at the end of the day, he's a real good player. And I would not be shocked if they get this done here soon enough. But depending on what number they want to settle on with him, they could kind of force other moves. And it might be more than just some roster movement of, NHL, AHL movement to create some extra space. It could force, a movement of a trade. And the main player that comes to mind is Kotkaniemi. So we'll see where that goes once that contract is completed. Now onto some other trade rumors around the NHL. Nashville, there's a recent article from the Tennessean talking about how the additions they've made this offseason, including a couple of big-time veterans in Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault, both Stanley Cup champions, both big-time goal scorers, are likely going to squeeze out a roster spot for a young player like Philip Tomasino. Now, he's a former first-round pick in 2019. He split the last couple of years between the NHL and AHL. Like, he hasn't really had a solid run yet, a full-time NHLer for like an entire campaign. And right now, you would kind of, based on that and where they've made these moves in the offseason, to kind of suggest their confidence in him to be a top scoring, full-time NHLer might not be as high as they'd like it to be. Otherwise, if they had more internal pieces, they might not have went out looking for so many more names like these guys to add to their roster. He's also unsigned. He's a restricted free agent, needs a new contract because of the fact that he's, kind of had to go up and down and hasn't had a solid, consistent spot. He doesn't have a lot of negotiating power. So it's hard to say what the contract's going to look like. It very well could be a 1-year deal, somewhere in the range of of his qualifying offer, perhaps. Like it's going to be under $1 million. So we will see what the Predators decide to do. But the belief is that with the roster constructed the way it is, there might not be a spot for him, and there's a decent chance we could see a young player like him on the move. Now, what the return could be, hard to say. Maybe it's picks, maybe it's other prospects that are not NHL ready. Hard to say, but I do think Tomasino has some decent upside here, and I do think there's teams out there that could get him into an NHL spot and make good use of him as a more of a bigger role and more opportunity. So we'll see if that happens. Moving him out of Nashville, same kind of scenario really for Buffalo and Peyton Krebs. As if you caught it earlier, I started a new series here on the channel doing GM report cards, which I did a few years ago. I haven't done it the past couple of off seasons, but so it's something I wanted to kind of pick up again here this off season. Essentially, kind of reviewing all the work of the GMs in this off season. We're looking at any trades they made, any internal signings, anybody they've signed as a UFA to bring in new to the organization, and just kind of analyze all that work and kind of grade them on where their offseason is, and did they accomplish everything that they were supposed to do. So of course, when the offseason first starts, I do an offseason plan series. Of course, if you follow this channel closely, you would have seen those videos in that series. So that series kind of reviews the regular season and kind of gives my take and opinion on where the what internal business they have to take care of, what contracts are expiring, and then kind of what I feel they're going to end up doing. What are their target pieces that they need to go after? What are the top questions facing that franchise? So now that most of that work is all done, we're going to come back to a new series, essentially reviewing what they did and grading the GMs on it. So GM report cards is back. We've got a couple of videos on the channel. The Sabres is the one I did today earlier. So if you caught that, I talked about Peyton Krebs there as well. Since I did that video, I'd come across another article from the Hockey News kind of talking about sort of the same thing. So essentially in my video this morning with the Sabres offseason review, I talked about the fact how they completely revamped their bottom six. They brought in Beck Malenstein, Aube-Kubel, Lafferty, and Ryan McLeod. So that's 4 players that are all going to play in your bottom 2 lines. In fact, the first 3 names I mentioned are likely going to make up your 4th line, whereas McLeod is likely your 3C. Now, Peyton Krebs could maybe play on the wing on the 3rd line. I'm not really sure that that's a really good spot for him, to be completely honest. They do have some other options there. Obviously, like between Zucker and Benson, one of those 2 wingers will be your 3rd line left winger. And then, of course, maybe a guy like Jordan Greenway to get some size in there, right? That's most likely what you're going to see, barring one of their youngsters really having such a great camp that they can't say no to him. Some had asked, could Hellenius make his debut? And I'm not so sure about that. I don't think they need to rush him. But at the end of the day here, Peyton Krebs to me could be getting squeezed out like Tomasino, right? I mean, he spent most of last year in the 4th line. Wasn't really a role where he was able to produce much offense. Good skater, but clearly, I don't think the team has confidence that's the right spot for him. They wouldn't have went out and completely revamped that bottom 6 if they thought he was doing a great job there. So he needs a new contract. Doesn't have a ton of leverage because it doesn't have the stats to really back it up to demand much money. And well, here we are. So looking at what their roster holds, he hasn't performed strong enough to really give him a shot in the top 6. They could, but I don't know. I mean, if they end up signing him and not trading him before the season starts, he could end up being the 13th forward. To be completely honest, I would not be shocked if that's what Krebs ends up being. So because of that, it is believed that any conversations that the Sabres have had around trades this offseason, that he was a name they were willing to include. We know that they were one of the teams that were in on Marty Necas in Carolina. Again, Necas, I believe, would not sign in Buffalo, so the deal never got super serious or really close, but it's believed that their offer did include Krebs and other pieces that would have ultimately got the deal done should Nate just have been willing to sign. But at the end of the day, it never happened. So we know that he's out there, and now you see lack of a role. A trade does seem pretty likely. Now with the Sabres, the other thing I mentioned in that video, which I'll say again now because it makes a lot of sense, is to me, you moved on from a top 6 forward in Jeff Skinner. I understand why they bought him out. As much as he wasn't living up to that contract, he was still producing, at a decent rate. And they didn't really replace that production. They brought in Jason Zucker. I'm sorry, I don't think he's as good as Jeff Skinner was going to give you, right? I just don't know that Zucker is, going to produce as many or more goals. So at the end of the day, if you look at where the Sabres were at the end of last season, their defensive metrics were actually surprisingly good. It was the offensive ones, like the goals for 5-on-5 and power play, were not good enough. Jeff Skinner was one of their best power play players. So as much as it made a lot of sense by, a lot of different ways to buy Skinner out, you needed to take that money and you needed to replace him with somebody who's going to give you as much or more production, and they did not do that. So to me, there's a glaring hole, and I'm going to say that right now, I'd say the Sabres are not going to get better. To say that their decor and their goaltending is going to get better again compared to what it was last season at the second half of the year, I thought that hadn't seen a lot of improvements, right? So I'm not sure that it can get a whole lot better. They were like 11th in the league in goals against. So, if they can't score, you're going to lose a lot of low-scoring games. Now, you've seen some other guys like Tage Thompson and Alex Tuch. Their numbers weren't as good as they used to have been either. So, there's other ways to go about this. So, to me, a target that makes a ton of sense for the Sabres, and they've been linked to him before. Haven't heard anything new in a while, but it's a player that was reportedly available to draft, and the Sabres were one of the teams that were supposedly in conversation with him, was Joel Farabee in Philly. There was some rumblings around the time of the draft that the Sabres were offering their first-round pick, and maybe the other pieces, Krebs could have been involved there, I'm not sure, for a package that would involve Farabee. To me, it would make a ton of sense if they would revisit that, because they have the space in their salary cap. They have some assets that would be interesting to the Flyers, and they need scoring. This guy can score. Krebs has so far not lived up to the hype as a first-round pick, and they need to find a way to kind of adjust here and get a new replacement for Skinner. And to me, if they can do that, and that pushes Zucker down, and might even keep a guy like Benson, kind of between your second and third lines, to me, you're a deeper, stronger team if you can do that. So Buffalo has work to do, and Krebs is likely going to be involved in any deal that they end up making if they can find that player. And lastly, I want to touch on Trevor Zegras. Of course, he's been a player that's had a ton of rumors around him throughout the course of the offseason. Of course, the Ducks offseason has been running longer than most teams where they didn't make the playoffs. Stu Grimson of the NHL Network recently brought him up. They were talking about him on there here just in a short time ago, and he said that he feels there's a really strong possibility that Zegras is indeed moved here sooner than later. Aspects of his game need to get better and need to mature. He said, don't get him wrong. He said he is a Zegras fan, loves his offensive skills, but defensively, there's certainly work to be done to improve things. And obviously, there's some that, and Verbeek would be one of these people that would like to see more aspects to his game, right? There's no physical aspect, not much of an edge. The checking part and the defensive part is what's not present enough in his game, right, to be more complete. And he basically also said is that, if Pat Verbeek was looking to add to his team, he would, and if Zegras played elsewhere, he's not a player that he would be targeting to bring into his organization. So he doesn't basically think that Zegras fits the description of the kind of player that Pat Verbeek wants in this core group of players that he feels he can win with. And I can understand that mentality. Verbeek was a hard-nosed player. Look at a lot of the other players they've drafted and brought in. They have more likelihood of playing that style of game, whereas Zegras is more of a fancier, offensive skilled guy and needs to add more elements to his game, I think, to be long-term successful. Can he still carve out a spot in the league and have a role and be offensive? Sure. But he's going to have a harder time winning coaches and managers over to want to have them on their team forever and ever without that game kind of evolving, you could say, in the next few years. So we will see where that goes. Really, as far as Zegras goes, the main teams in this article that I was reading, referencing the Stu Grimson comments, references, this is all from earlier in the offseason, but the main teams mentioned before was Montreal, Calgary, Ottawa, and Philly. And to be honest, I don't think there's any chance that he's going to end up being a Philadelphia Flyer. John Tortorella has been extremely critical of Zegras and that type of play, especially that some of the Michigan goals and the fancy one he scored with Sonny Milano a few years ago. Tortorella was the most critical, saying if anybody on my team tried that, they'd be sitting on the bench, or what. I can't remember exact quote. I want to quote him and be wrong, but like paraphrasing to some extent. Like, that kind of stuff drives Torts nuts. I can't imagine those two. I mean, it would make for good entertainment for us, for the fans. I don't see it working well for the team and the player. But the other teams mentioned, yeah, there's been a lot of links to Montreal to a variety of players. Hard to say. Like I said before, when it comes to Ottawa, could he fit there? Maybe. I'm not completely sold that that's the perfect spot for him. I don't know what they would offer, to be honest. Calgary would be a great spot for him. They're in the midst of a rebuild. So I think he would honestly love playing in Montreal since he's such great friends with Cole Caulfield. I don't know how intrigued Montreal is by that. We've heard, like I said, them linked to guys like Zegras and Laine all offseason, and nothing has happened. So time will tell if they get there or not. But let me know your thoughts. Obviously, more and more people think Zegras will get moved. Just a matter of where and when. And time will tell. May not really get a pressure point on that for a little while yet, since we're nowhere near yet to getting close to training camp in the beginning of the season. So let me know your thoughts on today's discussion down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time.